Let's take a look today at artifact paintings and photographs that have been freely available for a long time and figure out what's wrong with them. This portrait by Albert Keep shows Cornelis with his coachman and tutor, created in the late 17th century. Here we see that everything in the foreground is highly detailed, while everything else has a different kind of drawing style. In the background there's a running man and a horse with some rubbery proportions of the riders' broken heads, as if photographs were inserted into the painting. You can see they're unusually large, just huge. It also looks like they were cut from a photo. So these are women's faces, and this female character, as is typical for a woman, is looking into the camera as if to say, "How do I look?" Moreover, shooting with a modern camera gives that kind of look in the moment with a fast shutter. Albert Keep's paintings, in general, all have a similar composition, as if they are assembled from different pieces. It's likely that during an investigation, it could be established that all of this was done by some kind of equivalent in past centuries, or maybe even in the 20th century. Looking at the painting Napoleon's Retreat, let's pay attention to the head of the Sphinx. As we know, in the history of France, the Egyptian pyramids and the Sphinx itself have great significance. One might think that it was inserted here symbolically, but there is a theory that this is a disguised nuclear explosion that burned Moscow and inflicted defeat on Napoleon's army in the form of radiation sickness. Yes, apparently more than one. Worldwide, this event is called the Year Without a Summer. Researchers suggest that this was a global nuclear war, the result of which was climate change and then the worldwide flood at the beginning of the century. Painting by Gustav Ferrer Dalmau, 1812. In this painting, it's clearly visible that the soldiers fighting have exactly the same uniforms and the same face. In fact, we see how the same person posed in different positions, and even in a dress uniform apparently straight from the parade. Earlier we discussed how the craftsmen of the past still make paintings. They may not shine with talent, but they're clever when it comes to inventiveness. In such paintings, the plot is completely made up, created to flood our history with myths. And since no one has noticed such forgeries so far, then why not? The level of unawareness among the population allows this to happen. The painting is the Battle of Preussisch-Eylau, 1807 nights. Here we see a variety of unusual and elaborate headgear worn by the warring armies. On the right, Prussian grenadiers are wearing their golden kokoshniks, and on the left, the French are in tricorn hats. It is suggested that after the cannons were destroyed, the soldiers advanced toward the enemy in tight formations with their weapons raised. Up until the actual clash, the infantry would fire an unaimed volley, and then a bloody melee would ensue. The soldiers had no physical training, only skills in handling the bayonet, maintaining the musket, knowledge of commands, and drill. Let's assume that the painting reflects a real battle of that time. Then it follows that the firearms of the past were no longer used and had been replaced by muskets. Probably this ridiculous parade appearance of the troops was a cargo cult inherited from past wars, where the victorious army, which we see on triumphal arches and paintings with laurel wreaths, chariots and so on, marched across the land they had conquered. And it was remembered specifically in ceremonial dress. That's why there was a tendency to fight in ceremonial uniforms. The original purpose of these peculiar hats was most likely technical, to help officers of all branches of the military manage and communicate with each other at any distance and to allow for their effective command. Painting by Adolf Gebens, The Army of the Russian Empire, 1862. Interestingly, photography had already been invented long ago, yet paintings continued to be produced en masse right up until the 20th century. It's clear why. A photograph could capture something that doesn't fit within the framework of official history. Here, military uniforms are simpler, and the faces come from only one or two people. We're interested in the flounces on the headgear. Let's assume these are electric field indicators. The communication and electric field detection system was among the very last to be phased out. There had to be a way to command troops before radio was invented, so it was used until the century's end. Popov made his discoveries just in time, and he wasn't alone. Many scientists worldwide invented radio simultaneously. Communication systems of the past have been completely removed from history. Communication was also used in churches even after that century. Each church was not only a capacitor of atmospheric energy, but also a headquarters. After the conquest, they not only received the voice of God there, but also managed cities and settlements from there. Painting by Adolf Gebbens, Ranks of the Lifeguards. Here, the soldiers are depicted wearing helmets that are no longer functional, used purely for decoration and lacking any technical purpose. In the end, everything was simplified to caps like those worn by the officers in the center. When the era of planetary conquest ended, the local authorities had a lot of different weapons and technologies on their hands, but no one understood how they worked. That's why we see different shapes of helmets, crests on helmets, and so on. For example, helmets became helmets with symbols of authority or military branch, even in the helmet of an ordinary firefighter. Hans Makart. The entry of Karl into Antwerp. The event of the century is depicted at the end. If this person on the horse is Karl, then I'm not surprised that this is, without a doubt, a woman's face. And this is just another fact that medieval artists often used women to depict the image of a man. Analyzing the psychology behind these tendencies could be worthwhile. But there's also another version. They just took a painting about something else and renamed it to Urgent Matters. The painting shows how the new authorities present themselves to ordinary people, to the local residents. A procession of soldiers with spears, nobles, and nude prostitutes. The central figure on the blue horse gestures, suggesting accessibility, lust, and debauchery. Jesuits in red hats walk on both sides behind the riders. The people are amazed and unsure how to react. For the pious society of that time, this was barbaric. Well, as we can see, all of Makart's paintings were about naked women and debauchery. Cleopatra was his creation too. She was the first woman in the world who used cosmetics and seduced great rulers who came to visit her. The history of Egypt is studied first in school as a symbol of the beginning of times, where moral standards were shocking, even incest was allowed. All of this came to Egypt from the Sumerian civilization. The point is that the new authorities offer people any temptations and sins as long as people obey them and willingly degenerate. These are historical plans, and we can clearly see them in paintings from the past, like Jean-François de Troyes' painting Time Unveiling Truth from the early 18th century. According to our interpretation, the character with the scythe and wings is a representative of the space fleet, probably a commander bringing death to people as symbolized by the scythe. He is undressing the woman who gives power over the world, who is resting her foot on the globe, and the painting is called Time Unveiling Truth. This truth has been revealed to us since the 18th century. The culture of prostitution of women is where humanity's main hidden degradation occurs. If sulfur pouring down on Sodom and Gomorrah were shown in the background, the picture would be complete. It was the cities that did not accept depravity that were destroyed, not the other way around. Giant beluga sturgeons were still being caught in the Volga at the beginning of the century. As we know, giant animals and vegetation were removed from the planet in the 18th and 19th centuries, with the aim of introducing a new formation in which giants living alongside humans also disappeared from official history. For example, you won't find apple trees with seed rootstocks in your city's markets and nurseries now, which have a strong root system, reach 6 meters in height and live up to 50 years. Everything is being replaced by dwarf trees, which bear little fruit, have a short lifespan, and are not resistant to Siberian winters. Fruit and berry crops are disappearing from forests and fields, and people somehow don't think to plant useful plants beyond the space of their own gardens. And in this way, these plants will soon also fall out of use. And at the same time, no one directly forced anyone. It's just that conditions were quietly created that contributed to this disappearance. Here is a photo of the agricultural pavilion shaped like a giant traditional wooden house. An interesting question is, what kind of whim is it to build such an inconvenient and difficult to construct house for people? There is a theory that the Civil War in America and the abolition of serfdom in 1861 were a purge of the previous civilization. People with superpowers were destroyed, and the memory of this remained in United States culture as stories about superheroes. The giants left our world, or as they say, they themselves were made to leave. Most likely, this was the home of the giants who lived there. After they were evicted, this hut was supposedly turned into a pavilion and then immediately burned down. The Third Reich, the 1930s. The Mercedes Corporation greets the passing Hitler with a phrase spelled out using cars. And to these corporations, they don't care about World War II at all. In their reality, it wasn't a problem for them. On the contrary, no wars affect the stability of European brands. You could ask, so what? But in Russia, there are no food products or technologies that have been perfected for centuries, preserving their traditions and brands. It's as if a constant, unending cataclysm is happening in this territory, leaving not a stone unturned, not only from the previous era, but nothing lasts even a decade here. For example, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had to buy a factory from Italy with gold in order to produce Zhiguli cars, and this practice continues to this day. Only outdated Western technologies are purchased, and implementing our own developments is forbidden. And here's what's surprising. Such directives were created back at the inception of the Russian Academy of Sciences, abbreviated as Russian Academy of Sciences in the 18th century. Jess Dixon's flying car, 1940. It's impressive that a double lifting rotor and such a compact vehicle were invented even back then. If such an innovation hadn't been cut off at the root, by now everyone could have beautiful, ergonomic, hybrid, and all sorts of vehicles that can fly, float, and drive at the same time. The flying platform VZ-1 Pauni, 1955. 60 or 70 years have passed since the invention, and flying platforms are still at the stage of experimental development to this day. 100,000 Iranian women are protesting against the law on mandatory hijab wearing in Tehran. 1979. This is regarding the question of human evolution. If in the 1980s Iran already had a thriving secular society, for some reason by now it has sunk into the Middle Ages. It turns out that you don't need any wars. You can simply establish the desired religion and system, and everyone will be forced to become inhabitants of the chosen era. Probably someone up above is now deciding under which system Russians will have to live in the near future. It's either the Bolshevik communist dictatorship of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics with aggressive atheism or an aggressive religious dictatorship under Tsarist autocracy. But judging by preferences in science fiction literature, the younger generation will most likely choose the era of bloody feudalism, where human life will be worth nothing and only barons and princes will have rights. Here we see the degradation of the elite, teachers who pass on knowledge to the nation. At that time, paying salaries with vodka didn't bother anyone, since the alternative was not getting paid at all. If someone says that the degradation started in Soviet times, that's not true. It began with religion in Russia. After the ritual, grown children had to drink wine, and a tavern was set up across from the church. Well, and the era of Peter's rule was marked by widespread alcoholism. 17th century coins with UFOs bombing cities. If we accept them as fact, then most likely such images were placed on coins in those times, not to commemorate past events, but as an indication of the established power of what happens to those who do not accept it. Back then, flying saucers destroying cities with powerful weapons weren't seen as conspiracy theories. The painting John the Baptist by Leonardo da Vinci is officially from the 15th century, but most likely it's actually from the 18th century as well. John the Baptist's face is actually a woman's, and this same face appears in other Leonardo paintings to his right. Conspiracy theorists have found a hint of an alien face if you mirror the painting, and yes, that's what you get. Did Vinci encode a message about who actually created the Christian religion that was introduced on Earth? Finally, at this video's end, you could say that our entire history consists of such pieces of evidence, and they can be interpreted in different ways, and there are reasons for that. Subtitles created by